Ladies, gentlemen, and goblins of all ages, welcome to the Dour Gnome Adventures side quest, Loose Cannon. This is episode 1, The Tale of Babbagetown. I am Dmitry. With me are Ryan, and the laugh is Matt.
Yep.
And we are currently playing through the 7 Dooms for Sandpoint. Is it 4 or of, Ryan?
7 Dooms for Sandpoint.
All right. So Sandpoint is getting all of its dooms. This is the daily recommended.
7 more.
Well, it's
we don't know if it's all.
It's the doom. It's in the doom budget. We got to use them. So
if we don't use the dooms, they will be taken away from us in next year's budget of doom.
Exactly. They're going to cut our doom budget. We got to spend all these dooms. Pathfinder 2 Adventure Path. And which takes place in the titular town of Sandpoint some 17 years after the events of Rise of the Runelords. All of us have played Rise. Some of us have played it multiple times with multiple groups. Some of us have run it. And we have decided to incorporate some of the actions of our previous PCs during those previous playthroughs into the canon of our current game. But because we didn't all play through the game at the same time, our stories vary. Hence, the canon is a bit loose. The purpose of these little side stories is to tell you and to remind us how we've impacted Sandpoint in the past and what lasting effects those PC actions have had. Tonight, I'm going to tell you about Mr. Wendell Babbage, Esquire. First, none of what you're going to hear is my fault.
That's true. It's true.
You can always blame Dmitry, but in this case, it is not Dmitry's fault.
It really isn't. I'm gonna actually lead off this part because this is my fault. So I will tell the story. I worked with a gentleman at my school, and I'm gonna leave his name out because I'm gonna leave his name out. Yeah, it's a long story, but the fact is, I worked with this guy, and he's like, "Hey, I want to run Pathfinder, yada yada yada." I'm like, "Yeah, I can put some folks together. We can make this happen." And he's like, "The thing I remember best about the beginning is I did not really look at the player's guide to Rise, and he gave us a ton of custom things. I had a levelable tattoo on my character's body that would give me different spells and such as I leveled up. It was really, really cool. The problem is, as much as I love my friend was not the most stable guy. And at a certain point, after having a very loud bust-up with Dmitry, he just up.
That one was my fault. That one actually was my fault.
It was Dmitry had altitis and changed characters. I really feel like it was 3 times within like a 6-week period.
Well, no, I changed characters once, and before I could change characters again, there was a bit of a headbutting, and I was like, maybe if I walk away, there won't be a problem.
And then there was.
Right. So eventually, I took over GMing the campaign because in the time that I stepped aside from that run of Rise, I had actually joined a different group of Rise that was further along. So I kind of spoiled myself on what was going to happen in Rise. And then we got together and the group was brainstorming about what to do. And after 4 hours, everybody's like, well, we really liked our characters for Rise. And I'm like, well, I could just pick it up and run it. And that's how I became the GM. And then we invited Brian to join us. And he witnessed Wendell Babbage's shenanigans firsthand, as we had. But as the GM, I had a bit more inside info about Wendell Babbage's shenanigans. And yes, I did enable a few of them.
I mean,
okay, most of them.
I mean, let's begin with the fact that the player for Wendell handed. Did he hand it to you? Did he hand it to our
remember,
mutual friend?
I was a fellow player. He shared it with everybody, but he was getting approval from the original GM.
Yeah.
Wendell Babbage was a middle-aged human male of Chilaxian descent who arrived in Sandpoint with an empty coin purse and a 15-page backstory.
That was the thing that I was getting to.
Yes.
Was whether or not you had read the novel.
I had to. Well, when I took over GMing, I was like, I need to know this now, don't I? Because initially I just glanced over it and I'm like, I don't need to know this. It's going to come out in gameplay. And I was like, I'm responsible for gameplay now. I have to read this. So yes, I did actually. I placed hooks for Wendell Babbage to bite onto. And in typical player fashion, he bit on all the other things except the ones that I baited for him.
He really yes-anded very well.
Oh, yes. Well, let's be fair. He had spent most of the time prior to our games, because he was a part of another game we shared, being a GM. And if there's one thing that being a GM does to you, it's, when am I going to play? I have so many ideas.
Yep.
Sometimes you just end up cramming all of those ideas into the same character, and that character sticks for a while. So the ideas just kind of spread. Didn't exactly take over the campaign, but there was quite a bit that Wendell Babbage had touched and tipped. Anyway, so our original GM actually had us arrive separately in Sandpoint. He wanted to do like individual character introductions and then bring us all together at the Swallowtail Festival. So Wendell Babbage was the first, and he arrived the day before the Swallowtail Festival. He heard about the festival, and the very first thing he did was go to the City Watch and hire himself as an additional guard for the festival. He needed money, and that was a job he knew that he could do, because part of his backstory was that he was a mercenary. He had spent time in, River Kingdoms. Yes, as a mercenary, he had made money, he had come back to his native Corvosa, he had spent money. It was a whole big thing. He ended up as a level 1 in Sandpoint because of all of that. But after doing his shift as a freshly minted Sandpoint City Watchman, still wearing the guard garb, he walked into the seediest tavern he could find and tried to join the mob so that he could be their inside man in the City Watch. Now, in what begins a very long tradition of people of Rise of the Runelords telling Wendell Babbage, no, fuck off, in diplomatic fashion, and Wendell Babbage not getting it, the Czarny declined his offer by actually making him a job offer. So those of you who have run Rise, or have read the background info for it, probably remember that in the run-up to the Swallowtail Festival Goblin attack, there is actually a rash of mill fires in the hinterlands, which leaves the Scarnetti Run mill in town as the only game in the neighborhood. And the Czarny, who are rumored to be doing the dirty work for the Scarnettis, are effectively the criminal organization, ethnically Varisian, but not exclusively so. But again, they do have something to lose if this random dude in guard clothing who literally rolled into town today joins them and goes, no, really, guys, I can do whatever dirty jobs you want.
in a cop's uniform.
Right. Like, he didn't take it off. He walked, I forget if it was the Hagfish or another bar, but he literally walks into the Hagfish, walks up to the bar and goes, so, hey, how can I get in touch with the mob?
I forget, is there a third, less reputable bar in town?
I don't know. It's been 17
it's not
years
that, honestly, not that serious. Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah. So our GM decided to humor Wendell Babbage by incorporating that mill burning bit into right now. Because technically it was still a day before the Swallowtail Festival. So he put a mill on the other side of Turandarok River, right across the Sandpoint Bridge from Sandpoint proper, just north of where the Lost Coast Road becomes the Sandpoint Bridge. And the Czarny told Wendell Babbage to go burn it. And I mean, anybody who understands Sandpoint would understand that this is kind of a bad idea, but Wendell Babbage was like, yeah, I can do that. So
it was one of the constant themes in the campaign was this player being able to, or not even the player, but the character, but the player speaking for him, being able to talk the party or as somebody into being able to go, oh yeah, that thing that you want to do is totally fine. And all the time.
I don't remember if he actually had sense motive. I know he had a poor wisdom. He was a ranger. And later in the campaign, like, he knew that will saves would be a problem, and he kept failing them.
Oh God, yes. I remember very clearly us looking into what gear could we buy, there was definitely a downtime where we just kind of sat there and says, well, what are we going to do about will saves?
Right. And again, to be fair to Mr. Wendell Babbage, Esquire, this was a known problem for 3rd edition in derivatives. if you were a ranger, you could be an arrow-slinging turret, killing anything on the battlefield that you had line of sight to.
Can confirm. I ran a favored enemy human urban ranger in Curse of the Crimson Throne, and it was just nasty sometimes. It really was.
Right. But one failed will save.
Oh, yeah.
Suddenly, the party no longer had the turret.
Oh.
Or, worse, the turret switched to the enemy team.
Yup.
Right. But that's for later. Right now, Mr. Wendell Babbage might not have had any ranks in sense motive. In which case, it would be like, yeah, sure, this thing is totally doable. I don't know anything about this town. It must be doable, right? They wouldn't tell me otherwise. So he snuck across the Tirandarok River without anybody noticing. Like, literally swam it into the forest on the other side. He lit a torch. And this is probably where the GM decided to throw him a bone, because a lone goblin approached him in the wood. And he managed to just give the torch to the goblin, because the goblins were fascinated by fire, and that was a thing he knew. And the goblin was like, yeah, I'd like fire. Yes, give me fire. And then he was like, now that I've given you fire, would you like to go into the mill over there? And the goblin was like, that is a reasonable suggestion. I am going to do that.
This had to be just him, because I do not remember that.
No, he rolled, like, if it wasn't a 20, it was like a total of 20 plus on a diplomacy check against the goblin.
No, I totally get that, but I don't remember that happening in character, in game, with all of us there.
Well, I remember it distinctly. I was watching that and I was like, oh my God. The goblin walks into the mill and sets it on fire. The mill burns down. Goblins are blamed for the fire because there was a goblin who came in there with a torch, right? Wendell Babbage, in the commotion of the mill burning, sneaks across the Tirandarok River back into town. He swims into town, still in his guard clothing. He walks back.
By the way, Ryan, it was never Wendell. It was never Babbage. It was always Mr. Wendell Babbage.
Right.
Always.
Occasionally.
Okay.
Occasionally you would append it Esquire if you wanted to be formal.
It's true. But
it was Mr. Wendell Babbage.
But the part of the reason he was Mr. Wendell Babbage is, in my head, it was to the tune of Mr. Dabalina by Del, the funky Homo sapien.
Mr. Wendell Babbage. Mr. Wendell Babbage.
Yes.
Mr. Wendell Babbage.
Yes.
Mr. Wendell Babbage.
Can't you stop your fraudulent behavior?
Yeah, it really, at a certain level, like, even the verses were really descriptive.
Yes. So he walks back into the Hagfish, or whatever seedy tavern it was, which has kind of cleared out because, fire, if you're not helping, you're at least watching, right? It's entertainment. He walks back in, dripping wet, guard clothing on him, walks back to the Zarni and goes, all right, it's done. What's next? And, I mean, once they recovered after their initial shock, they were like, we'll get back to you, because they really couldn't figure out what to do. And then they didn't, because the following day there was the Swallowtail Festival, and the PCs got involved in a combat against goblins, and Mr. Wendell Babbage was a guard. So he had every right for violently dispatching those goblins, and then he was recruited into an adventuring group eventually known in our run as Saviors of Sandpoint. The mill burned down, though, and you guys went on to do all the things in Chapter 1 up to the Thistletop Dungeon, which is when I stopped being a player and walked away. And I came back as the GM after you guys had already completed the dungeon. And this is at the point where, taking over GM duties, I went into the background material and I realized something that our original GM had missed. He had assumed it was a lumber mill, but the background info talks about grain mills. So not only did he torch a mill across the river from Sandpoint, he effectively set off a fuel air bomb. The mill was a total loss. There was no way to rebuild it from the explosion that shattered it. And basically, it was gone. But it did matter because Mr. Wendell Babbage, in addition to the many, many things in his background, was obsessed with rebuilding or building his own mercenary company. And he had multiple times in both his background and during gameplay hired people to be his mercenaries. Usually, he would run out of money before those people could do any mercenary work for him, and that's kind of how he ended up penniless in Sandpoint. So he happened upon the idea that he could educate his own mercenary company, and he thought that he could do that by taking short-lived races which mature quickly and bring them into civilized society, like goblins. So when the party ended up in the Thistletop Dungeon and found 10 cages with feral goblin babies, Mr. Wendell Babbage insisted that the party needed to bring these cages back to Sandpoint so he could get started with his mercenary company. Now, the party spent like a day or two just cutting the way through the thistles so they could drag these cages to the road.
No, more than that. Because
Or?
at the top of fucking Thistletop, we found a horse.
Yes, and also a horse.
We had to figure out how
to get a horse.
I still think about it and I go, there had to have been a better way, but I can't think of one. Especially, I forget, there's one of my favorite traps ever, which is the very, very obvious bridge trap, that the bridge, as you cross it, will break. In Thistletop, yeah. Sorry if you're playing, Rise of the Runelords now 20 years later. I'm sorry to spoil it for you, but yeah. I don't remember if we fixed the bridge, so I don't remember.
You kind of did. I think you actually you fixed the bridge with the previous GM.
Oh, okay.
Because you didn't fix it with me, but you guys told me it was already fixed, and I was like, I'm not going to make you refix it again. I'm not that cruel. I'm just going to make you cut your way through all the thistles.
Yeah, I love that you have to throw that in there. I disagree. I think that you might be.
All right. The evaluations of my GMing vary.
Do they?
Well, they vary from my viewpoint.
I'm just messing with you, dude. No. Keep going.
All right.
Sorry.
So there were a number of factors that interfered with Mr. Wendell Babbage's plan of triumphant return to Sandpoint. Number one,
I will. By the way, continue to laugh in the background every time he says,
"I don't."
Mr. Wendell Babbage.
So first thing,
Mr. Gobelina,
Mr. Wendell Babbage.
So first thing is, one of the things the previous GM did was he had the goblins capture and left unconscious in Thistletop the mayor of Sandpoint. Except when I was the player, she was still in town. So I'm coming in as the GM, and I'm like, all right, so you guys finally make it to the gate of Sandpoint, and they're like, we have the mayor with us. And I'm like, you what? You have what? Well, it looks like the mayor, so I had to hastily invent a cousin from Magnamar, who was not Kendra, but Sandra Deverin, who had actually been kidnapped by goblins trying to get to the Swallowtail Festival. Like, on the spot, I had to make that up. But that wasn't a good look when, you show up with basically a train of loot from a dungeon of goblins, and you go, so we got the mayor back here, and the gate guard goes, the mayor says she's over here. I mean, I literally sent for her, and she's walking down the street right now. Did I mention this is the middle of the night? This is all done in torchlight. They're talking literally across the gate, and Wendell is just trying to get them to open the gate. And his idea of bringing these goblins into town wasn't like to have a conversation about it. He just covered them all with tarps.
Yeah, that I remember.
So there's 10 feral goblins in cages, just covered in like cloth or whatever rags you guys found.
And I cannot imagine, and I can imagine the stench must have been impressive.
That was for you guys. You hadn't impressed the stench upon the guards or the Father Xanthus, the mayor, the sheriff, whoever was present. No, they heard the noises. And they're like, what's making those noises? So Wendell had to uncover those cages, and they're like, you brought goblins. You brought goblins to a town that's currently recovering from a goblin attack. You brought, and he's like, but they're babies. You brought baby goblins into... And to continue.
By the way, this
because what do baby goblins become?
Regular goblin. The best part of this was I cannot emphasize to you how long the conversations with Wendell's player and Dmitry went on about him bringing the goblins into town. Like at a certain point, I in my head I'm like, he has to give up, right? Like he has to understand this isn't happening. No.
Well,
no,
it was not just the character; it was the player not understanding how anybody could look at this and interpret it differently. Like, dude, they buried people killed by goblin attacks. You were there. You were literally a city guard. No, it's like, Dmitry, why are you punishing me for my character's choices? That's literally
that was definitely. I remember that. I remember that.
You know,
and I remember just kind of sitting there and going, really, still talking.
And to continue the tradition of people of Sandpoint telling Wendell Babbage to fuck off politely and Wendell Babbage not getting it, they told him that he could put those goblins on Chopper's Isle.
And again,
if you've played Rise...
is this like a goblin concentration camp?
Yeah.
Oh, God.
Basically.
Oh, no.
There really wasn't a better way to interpret it. But they were like, we don't want these goblins. Put them where the mass murderer lived.
Yeah, but
he was like,
and a bit of a lore dump. Chopper's Isle is a possibly haunted area in Sandpoint that literally a serial killer lived. Probably is about 15 years before the events of Rise.
No, 5.
5? Oh, I didn't realize it was that close. So yeah,
the late unpleasantness is 5 years before Rise starts. So it would be 22 years before Seven Dooms.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
But like the people of Sandpoint felt really betrayed by Chopper because they trusted him, and then he turned out to be a murderer who actually killed several prominent and well-liked figures. And actually the sheriff before Baylor Hemlock was the last victim, managed to fight Chopper, injure Chopper, and they found out who Chopper was because they followed the blood trail from the sheriff's corpse. So, traumatizing, and we don't really want to talk about it type deal, which you will probably still encounter if you live in or pass through a small town. We don't talk about the bad things that happened in town because we don't talk about bad things.
Because they were unpleasant.
It's fine now. Exactly.
It also, but it was really interesting because it made it difficult in character to kind of ferret out.
Yeah, none of you were native.
And it was a really interesting challenge to try because it ends up being important in character in kind of tweezing out what exactly is going on here.
Yeah, and I was giving you guys stuff with like gather info and diplomacy. And then, of course, when you actually started talking about those roles, you would say the wrong things to the wrong people, and they'd go, I am done talking to you now. Because they're written as, I'm not going to talk about this shit. It's like, well, who else is still alive who can? But what ended up happening was Mr. Wendell Babbage and the various authorities of Sandpoint reached a compromise.
Why does it continue to be funny?
Mr. Wendell Babbage.
Mr. Babbage.
So what the compromise was this. Technically, the land upon which the burned/exploded mill stood was outside of town. and the Sandpoint authorities didn't want the goblins in town. But theoretically, Mr. Wendell Babbage could just build whatever he wanted for these goblins beyond city limits, except he still needed a permit to build on the land. And nobody really wanted to do anything about these goblin babies. So I invented Rustem the Miller, whose mill Wendell had burnt and exploded, who continued to have a deep distrust of, well, pretty much everybody, but very specifically the Zarni and the Scarnettis, because he thought, against everybody's judgment and all pieces of present evidence, that actually it was the Zarnis who torched his mill in service of the Scarnettis, because the Scarnettis now had the only mill. He was convinced that there was a conspiracy, and he had absolutely no proof because everybody knew that a goblin with a torch blew up his mill. But Mr. Wendell Babbage, if he would so graciously and kindly provide the money to rebuild the mill where it stood, the mill that he had burnt and exploded via goblin arson, he could have a part of the plot of the land to build a compound upon, where he could have a nursery for his feral goblin babies to grow into potentially productive members of society. It was the kind of diplomatic language that got put into a contract by the head of the Sandpoint Mercantile Exchange, who is the Paladin is still the head of it 17 years later, isn't he, Ryan?
It's in the player's guide.
Yeah, but I don't have it in front of me. But
Give me a second.
All right, take your time.
You can always talk.
Yeah, Dmitry, you really can.
I don't challenge Dmitry to...
Yes, but getting a small breather is nice. So, essentially, I had them draw up a contract to state that Mr. Wendell Babbage fronts the money for rebuilding of Rustem's mill, because Rustem absolutely did not have the kind of money required to rebuild his mill from scratch. But once the mill was operational, he could actually pay some of it off, in theory, since, the Scarnettis would no longer be the only game in town, or outside town limits. In the hinterlands, yes. Technically, anything beyond the Tirandarok River is the hinterlands, and Wendell would get a building. And originally, it was going to be a thing for multiple players, but Wendell kind of was the only one who put up the money, was the only one who gave me a floor plan, and was the only one who had an idea of what he wanted to do. So it ended up being the Babbage compound. And then later still, when Wendell was thinking of how exactly he's going to take care of the babies if he's out adventuring, he hired a couple of orderlies from Ehrenhabe's sanatorium. Because when you guys went there, there was a member of the party named Harko, the dwarven cleric of Sarenrae. Yes, a dwarf who is a priest of the sun goddess. Yes, he got all of the weird looks from his fellow dwarves. Like, not only did you go topside, you stared at that glowing ball and decided to worship it, and then it worked? That's just weird. So when you guys were rolling through the sanatorium and trying to figure out what was wrong with its various inhabitants, you happened upon a dude who's only there because he's blind. And Harku goes, really? That's the only problem? Because I have removed blindness, deafness. And I'm like, well, I know you have it as a cleric, but do you have it prepared? And he's like, no, I prepared blindness, deafness removal. And I'm like, so you just cast it and it works? And it did. So they had the formerly blind guy who was no longer blind and didn't need to stay in the sanatorium. And they had completely sound of body, but a little bit out of mind, 97-year-old. And those two can just be released on their own recognizance because the blind dude is no longer blind and can tell the dude who's not all there what work needs to be done. So they're fine. And then that left the orderlies with nothing to do.
They were tieflings.
Well, you see, that's the thing. Originally, Rise was published as third-party content for 3rd edition D&D. Was it 3.5? Probably 3.5. And then there was an anniversary edition, remake, remaster, whatever, that updated it for Pathfinder. Side note, the update wasn't exactly thorough.
There was
a few misprints.
Some absolutely wonderful fuck-ups that were just delicious.
But That's a tale for. That's when we're talking about Brian's PTSD, post-traumatic sawmill disorder.
So to jump back to Mercantile League, yes, it was Jasper Kravatsky.
Thank you.
The Paladin.
Right. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Sandpoint, originally it was actually established as a joint venture between multiple noble families, including the Kaijutsus, the Deverans, Valdemars, and the Skarnetics.
Yeah, sorry.
Right. Yeah. And they didn't want to directly rule that part, especially because there were a few minor ethnic cleansings this way and that. There was a compromise. They established a trusted person taking care of the legal stuff. And that's effectively the Mercantile League, where it's technically the law in town, but not really like heavy-handed rule. It was a compromise deal. But if you needed anything legal, that's kind of where you went. So that's where they made this contract. And then Wendell added to this contract the orderlies from Aaron Habe's sanatorium, because he was like, I'll pay you guys to take care of babies. I know you can take care of people who poop themselves. You were in the sanatorium with the insane. So originally, in the original, they are human. And then in the remaster for Pathfinder Anniversary, they are tieflings, which in Pathfinder 2 would make them humans with Nephilim ancestry and possibly demonic or bestial features, whatever. It varies. You don't really need to have anything that has mechanical impact, but visually, somebody would know. But everything varies. Well, those guys were getting paid by Wendell Babbage to do this, so yeah, absolutely. Then later still, when the party was in Magnimar, they happened to cross a woman who, well, she looked like a human woman, but she turned out to also be a tiefling. And she was a carver of fine statuary. Her name was Ayava. She had actually been a heretical worshiper of Nocticula. Nocticula being the demon lord of Succubi. You know, the whole seduce mortal men, steal their souls, kill them, breed with powerful demons for more power, scheme evil schemes. You know, the Succubi. I mean, they're popular enough that you'll probably come across an interpretation of them in some piece of media or another. But Ayava had a different vision of Nocticula. She thought that Nocticula was actually misunderstood. She was actually good-hearted and trying her best to rise against her demonic nature and ascend, potentially becoming maybe an imperial lord like the good-aligned lords worshipped by various Verizians in the area of Magnimar, or maybe even a full-scale goddess. Ascension to godhood among demons isn't actually an unknown thing. Hypothetically, that's what happened with Lamashtu, even if nobody currently alive can verify that. And essentially, demons who accumulate enough power might actually be indistinguishable from gods in certain ways and seriously grant followers spells and have clerics. So why not? So Ayava decided, I'm going to keep worshiping it like this. And she needed a place to hide out. And Wendell was like, well, I have a compound in a town called Sandpoint. At which point we've entered into a meme from our campaign where anybody who didn't actually have familiarity with Sandpoint was contractually obligated to ask, what's a Sandpoint?
So that's where that came from, huh?
Yeah. Basically, anytime the party was like, we're the saviors of Sandpoint, the NPC would be like, what's a Sandpoint? Because it's described as a middle of nowhere town that nobody's really familiar with. So they'd go, we're from, and you're what? You're who? Slim Shady? And that actually appealed to Ayava because she wanted a place to hide out, because she thought that actual worshippers of Nocticula, so like succubi and demons, were after her to kill her because she's a heretic. So Wendell allowed her to make a small workshop in the back of the Babbage compound, where she would carve statues, which she would sell to nobles. And that way she could continue financing both the existence of her workshop, her own existence, and potentially maybe even spread the worship of Nocticula, because people would listen if she would spend money on it, in theory. Then, unfortunately, for anybody who relied on Wendell, he went off somewhere very far and died. So the money train stopped rolling in. Fortunately, though, the grain mill and the workshop manage to sustain the Babbagetown compound. And then, to everyone's surprise except Ayava's, Nicticula comes out as a good aligned goddess.
I find that hilarious, by the way.
You know? Yeah. I'm sure the day that happened, Ayava was like, I told all of you, I knew. So Ayava could finally openly worship Nicticula as the patron of the arts and potential redemption to those who don't really want to continue in their evil ways, as opposed to Sarenrae's whole, now you're going to do good. Nicticula is all about, now you're going to stop doing evil, maybe? Have you considered not? And sometimes that works, I mean, it worked for Nicticula. She was like, I don't want to be evil anymore. And enough people were like, yeah, sure, that sounds good. You're our goddess now. So there's an actual shrine to Nicticula open to the public, though the back areas of it feature the kind of statuary that Ayava was carving when Nicticula was the demon queen of succubi. And I quote, depictions of succubi who are in romantically entwined embraces.
So porn.
That's official Paizo stuff, okay?
Porn.
That's not me.
Porn.
Look, it's not porn. It's aesthetic, okay? It's art.
Okay. Okay.
It's art it's art that you sell to nobles. It's
As we know from the Curse campaign, art sold to nobles can vary in taste.
And you should probably not be tasting these statues, but to each their own. Anyway, so the point is, thanks to both of those businesses continuing to exist, Babbagetown has continued to exist as well. And as tends to happen, if you have a place where babies are being taken care of, sometimes somebody might leave their babies that they don't really want to take care of, but don't really want to die either at that place.
So it's an orphanage.
Well, yeah. I mean,
Could be a fire department.
Safe haven.
No, not after what happened to the mill the first time. No fire. No fire. But given that these goblin babies were already being taken care of by tieflings / Nephilim, if we're upgrading for 2nd edition rules, it should come to no one's surprise, there would be Nephilim babies who weren't necessarily wanted due to their Nephilim traits that would end up at their doorstep or at the shrine of Nicticula, who very recently was a demon lord and is now a goddess, So that's how Jacob, specifically, ended up being raised in Babbagetown. He was in the nursery because one perfectly fine day, he found himself outside of that before he was even aware that he existed, because he was found by the tieflings who run the place. And that currently exists in the 7 Dooms for Sandpoint. We didn't have a goblin PC, but if we had one and they wanted to have grown up in Sandpoint, that would have been a place they could have.
I don't think goblins were Pathfinder legal at that point. We played a long time ago.
We did have access to archetypes because Mr. Wendell Babbage, Esquire, specifically bargained with the original GM of our campaign to trade away any and all spellcasting he would ever have as a ranger for other things.
Yes.
So he wasn't just picking and choosing archetypes. He was an urban ranger, which already I think trades away some stuff. And then he was like, listen, I don't want any spellcasting. None of this. Can we get rid of this? Can we like for free? I just want it gone. I was like, well, we can trade something. And then he's like, can we just, maybe reflavor this spell-like ability as extraordinary? And I was like, all right, man, if that makes you feel better, sure. You have 0 spellcasting. Nobody will make you cast any spells you don't want. Okay? Really had to talk him down like that.
Yeah, he was
in between.
He was a real big personality.
In between the points that I've mentioned, Mr. Wendell Babbage got to a lot of things. So, not that we want to stretch this into a series of lore dumps, but there's plenty of material.
Yeah.
And I can do this all day, but I don't really want to. These are tales for another time. For now, this is the tale of how Babbagetown came to be and why it exists in our game of Seven Dooms. Thank you for listening.